going to call to order the Assembly work session for property evaluation appraisals for today. And we'll begin with an introduction of everyone that's sitting at the table. There's going to be presenters as well as Assembly. So we'll begin with my
John Wedwick, Chief Appraiser.
Bryant Robbins, Municipal Assessor.
Ernie Hall, Anchorage Assembly. Tim Steele, Assembly.
Dick Training Assembly.
L.B. Gray Johnson.
Amy Domboski.
Bill Starr.
And Bryant, you're going to be doing the presentation. The floor is yours. I'm assuming, or I'm relatively sure we're going to be joined by a couple more Assembly members at least. But
Thank you. Members of the Assembly, thank you for the opportunity to update you on the 2014 tax basis valuation. I'd like to let my group introduce themselves at this point. Jerry's already introduced himself. Kelly Lewis.
I'm Kelly Lewis, the Deputy Director.
John Dyson, Residential Supervisor.
Janet Simpson, Customer Service and Personal Property Supervisor.
Brent Schlosstein, Commercial Supervisor.
The news from the real estate market this year is really quite positive overall. I'm happy to report that. So we're going to drill down into more detail, but to begin with, you've seen this map before, but it shows the municipality of Anchorage and the boundaries. The interesting thing is that the taxable property within the municipality is actually located in a fairly small area, and that's the darker shaded areas of the municipality. So the vast majority of taxable parcels are located within those small areas. Tax base is composed of three main categories: residential, personal property, and commercial. Residential and commercial are both real property. This next slide further breaks down the composition of the tax base. And the interesting thing when you really start to look at this slide is that there are several property types, or a few property types, that many people intuitively believe would make up a large portion of the tax base, when in fact they're a really small portion. Hotels, for example, the purplish blue bar there as it's being projected, are a really small portion of the tax base overall, but they're a large, prominent, and individually valuable segment. Inside those taxable areas, not all property is taxable, though. There are a number of types of exemptions. There are, as you know, voluntary exemptions. Those exemptions are enacted by the municipality. There are also state-mandated exemption, and this graph shows the types of state-mandated exemptions that we have within the municipality: charitable, federal, municipal, for example. You're probably aware of this, but by far the single largest segment of that population is the senior citizens and disabled veterans exemption, and that accounts for a shift in the taxes of almost or over $30 million. The next slide you've seen before.
Ernie, got a question for you.
Okay.
Yes. On the last slide, can we break out senior citizens and disabled veterans?
Two separate categories?
Two separate categories, because I know that America's aging, but also we've had this war going on for 10 years. I want to see the impact on the veterans and the senior community, if you would.
Mr. Trainee, we don't have the information available for you right now, but I'm more than happy to get it and get it to you.
You can send the email a chart.
I can do that.
Breaks that one down.
I can do that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Gray Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, sprinkler. I'm not familiar with what type of exemption that is. Can you refresh my memory? And utility and VO. What are those three exemptions,
Okay.
please? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The sprinkler exemption in a sprinkled property that allows for up to 2% of the property value to be exempt, is that correct?
2% of the building value that's protected by the sprinkler system. So some buildings only have a partial system, and so only 2% of that part of the sprinkler is exempted.
Can I follow up on that, Mr. Chairman? Well, first off, has that always been an exemption?
As long as I've been here, yes.
Wow, I was asleep on that one. Does that include personal, like homes?
No, that's only for commercial property.
Okay.
It would include homes if they have a sprinkler system,
Okay.
Okay.
not smoke detectors.
And the other two?
The utility question?
Yeah, and the VO.
Okay.
Sure, the utility exemption, Ms. Jackson, is, those would be for, an example would be Chugash Electric, who would be a member cooperative, would be the utility one. And your second question, VO, is veterans organizations.
Okay.
So
Thank you. Thank you.
is the utility one, is that just the physical plant, or is that the lines, the value of the lines, distribution lines?
I believe it is just the physical plant, sir.
And I need the record to show that we've been joined by Mr. Holman
And Mr. Birch.
and Mr. Birch.
I had a question. Do we have a farm exemption? I mean, I don't know there's that many farms. Of course, you go across the Kinnick Arm, you've got a lot, down in South Anchorage, I know there's, I don't know if there's any farmsteads down there, but I just didn't see farm on here. I was wondering, is there some reduced deal for that? Or?
I'm deferring most of these exemption questions to Kelly Lewis because she's been handling the exemptions for the last 10 years. My belief is we have the exemption, but there are none in the municipality. Is that correct?
Let me clarify on that. As Mr. Van Zant, the state assessor, who's also here, can confirm, the farm use exemption is required throughout the state of Alaska, so there's an application process. We have in the past had one organization that received the farm use exemption. It is an application process that they have to apply every year.
Okay.
So currently, we don't have any.
Because I have property in the Matsu, and I know they've got a lot of.
And there's a large amount of
Yeah,
them out there.
Yeah, right. I was just kind of curious. I didn't see them.
Sure, it is a
Thank you.
mandatory exemption that it needs to be applied for by the
It's
taxpayer.
like a discount or something, isn't it? Or like a percentage?
deferral.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next slide, as I mentioned, you've seen before, but it does continue to show a pretty significant increase in the senior citizen and disabled veteran exemption. And with the aging of the population, as Mr. Trainee noted, the war going on, it's likely to, or it's reasonable to conclude that this trend will continue. We're primarily here to update you on taxable property and the value of that property. As I mentioned, the news in the Anchorage market over the last year has been quite positive. These two graphs show contrast the Anchorage market with national indexes since 2007. And as you can see, after the onset of the global economic downturn, the Anchorage market fared very well compared to the national market. The Anchorage market did, however, go flat during that period, and particularly between 2009 and 2012. Beginning in 2012, we started to see resumed appreciation in property values, and that trend continued into 2013 and actually accelerated in 2013. Another measure of the health of the market is how much new construction is going on. And as you can see, residential new construction last year increased 7.1%. There was some decrease in commercial. I believe that commercial number is a little bit misleading because there are over $200 million in permit value associated with exempt properties or there were in 2013. A very large portion of that is commercial property. So there is commercial construction going on, it's just that a lot of it is exempt, has been exempt in the past year. The total was an increase over last year of 1.6%.
Mr. Holman?
If that commercial, the percentage of commercial was not exempt, what revenues would we be seeing different?
We would have to analyze that. I know that there's $200 million in exempt in permits associated with exempt properties. Of that, about 75%, I believe, is associated with commercial. Assuming that you added dollar for dollar, that would be the impact of about 75% of the $200 million.
Mr. Birch?
I just had a question on, and just remind me, when something comes online mid-year, And Ms. Johnston and I had a constituent that was looking at assessment as it relates to road improvement area, for instance.
Right.
And they were trying to figure out, well, can you get a tax bill for half the year? Do we do partial year at all, or is this all basically, was it some date in January?
As of January 1st.
January 1st?
January, yeah. The assessment, the lien date or the assessment date is as of January 1st, and we'll talk about it more, but the green cards are mailed on the 15th. And there's no, the municipality does not prorate.
Right, okay, yeah, fair enough. Thank you.
So would I have to have occupancy permit?
We assess what is there as of January 1st.
Oh,
So
okay.
a
So
part,
if
a
it's partial, they
foundation,
get partial.
yeah, a foundation or a skeleton, whatever's there, that's what we assess. This chart shows the trend in new construction since 2006. As you can see, we've experienced an uptick in 2012 and again in 2013. It's nowhere near the boom years, but we're doing better than we did at the bottom in 2010 and 2011. So to summarize the tax base, this chart shows the change in value, including new construction. So this is both the change in assessed value due to market increase and the addition of new construction. The overall increase in value was 4.3%, residential 4.2, commercial 4.5, and personal property 4.2. We're going to break down those various segments now. As I mentioned, residential property is the single largest segment, and it also gets a lot of attention in the community. People want to know how the value of their house changed, so we'll get into that. Once again, recapping, the overall change, including new construction, was 4.2%, but we wanted to talk about the change in assessed value, and that's what this slide shows. The average change in assessed value for a single-family residence in 2013 to 2014 was 3.8%. That would be the market change. Duplexes and triplexes did a little better at 4.7%. Condos, we observed a 1.3% increase in value for an overall change of 3.1% in the residential segment.
And that's sales, but not whose numbers are those then?
Those are our observation of sales, and I'll get in a couple slides down. I'll show you what information we have available to us, but that's based on our observed sales. This slide further breaks down those changes. I know many of you are probably interested in how your area of town changed. The top 8 market clusters there, in valuing these residential properties, we divide them into market clusters. And the top 8 are geographic market clusters. Downtown, Mountain View, Hillside, for example. And you can see that those changed 4.4% in downtown. Mountain View lagged at 2.7. The largest increase was Sand Lake at 5.5. The bottom clusters are what we call global clusters, and they are a type of house that can be found in any part of town. Duplexes, custom homes, condos, for example, and those get valued. They're still broken out into neighborhoods, but they are valued in a global cluster. And you can see the change in value there. Duplex, triplex, once again at 4.7%. And speaking to your question, in tracking the market, we were able to track 1,856 listings. Of those listings, our assessed value to list price ratio was 94%. That means that we're assessing at 94% of the list price, and we observed 3,300 roundly deed changes through December 15th. Of those 3,300, we were able to confirm the sale price of around 1,000. It's a non-disclosure state, so people are not required to give us the sale price. Of the sales that we were able to confirm, we're assessing at 96% of the sale price on average.
Ms. Gray-Jackson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just out of curiosity, how do you confirm the sales price?
Through, a lot of the data we get comes during the appeal period when people bring us their sale price or give us fee appraisals that contain other sales. We send out questionnaires asking people to report their sale price. Those are the primary ways.
Just on a side note, I remember how my sale price was revealed. 20 years ago, I was really, really happy that I was buying my first home and I was in the elevator. I was a municipal employee. And I said, oh yeah, I got my first home. And somebody from property appraisal was in the elevator. It's like, well, how much did you pay? I'll never forget that.
Dollar steal.
Voluntary disclosure.
So now you don't ride with any of them?
No.
Steal.
Yeah, my question is, that's a state law in terms of non-disclosure state. So
I believe that is state.
So we have to
The
change the
state does
state
not.
law in order to require
I think the
disclosure.
city could, sorry, Ernie?
I don't know.
Steve, couldn't the city change it themselves? I think we argued this once before. It was brought forward, I think it was Fay maybe, that wanted to have disclosure here, and we had a big battle on it.
Real estate.
The reason being, you can require it, but you have no hammer. With a
Yeah.
state requiring it, they couldn't record the deed until they provided it. But with the city requiring it, you just have no hammer with it, so there's no enforcement on it.
And there's no cooperation with the multiple listing or anything like that?
In fact, they're dead set against it.
It's not a battle we want to fight again.
Another measure of activity in the market is the number of sales activity. And this slide shows condominiums, duplexes, and single-family sales over the last 3 years. And as you can see, in all three of those categories, we've had significant increase in sales activity in 2012 and 2013. This is speaking of the MLS, this is a metric that the community is often interested in. How does our assessed value compare to the average sale price on the MLS? These are measures of different databases, but if in a given year the mix of properties sold by the MLS is a fair representation of the overall inventory in the community, there should be some correlation here. And this year, the observed ratio is 96%. It's exactly the same as our sale price to AV ratio.
How do you know multiple listing sales?
It's published. It's published. That's published publicly. The average price is published publicly. We did not calculate that ourselves. That's just the MLS website. Commercial property also saw some strong performance this year. The overall change in value, this also, once again includes new construction, was 4.5%. We went from $9.5 billion in value to $9.9 billion in value. Breaking that down into assessed value change, excluding new constructions, in other words, the market value change, you can see that fourplexes really took off over the past year. The financing in fourplexes is still relatively easy for an owner-occupant. There is very little new inventory coming into the market. The vacancy rates in the community for rentals is very low. All those factors help drive up fourplex value at the fastest rate of any segment. Some of those same factors are influencing the apartment sector, low vacancies, and little new inventory coming into the market drove up apartments at 6%. The contrast to that is the retail market. Oh.
Sorry, just apartment complexes. Wilder is building one on the old Seward Highway.
Right.
384 units. And I'm told they're already about 90% commitments when they build that to
Oh, really?
occupy.
That's
They
interesting.
haven't even turned dirt yet. That's a real problem in this town with
Yeah.
available housing.
And
There isn't any.
I think until we start seeing more new inventory coming into the market, you'll continue to see these the values drive up at a faster than typical rate.
Thank you, sir.
The contrast to the fourplex and apartment market, which is adding little inventory, is the retail market, which is experiencing something of a building boom. Intuitively, you might expect the values to be driven up accordingly, but I think this new inventory coming into the market is actually having a damping effect on the demand for the existing inventory, and as a result, the retail lagged and only increased at just under 1%.
Can you tell me how you classify like Cabela's?
It's retail.
Is it retail?
Yes. Hotels is another segment that saw strong performance this year. Room revenues continued to increase, and we saw expense ratios improve as a result of the added revenue. And those two factors drove up hotels at 8.2%. Overall, the increase in value in commercial property was 4%. In tracking the commercial market, we value fourplexes separately from all the other commercial property types. The top section of this slide is all types of commercial property other than fourplexes. We were aware of 80 sales in the commercial segment, and we were able to confirm 31 of those sale prices. Now, there's over 100 different types of commercial property that we categorize, so this is nowhere near one sale per property type. But of those sales, our assessed value to sale price ratio was 92% in the commercial segment. In fourplexes, we tracked 93 sales. We were able to confirm the sale price of 22 of those, and we have a 95% assessed value to sale price ratio.
I was just, since the building kind of kitty corner over here, the ConocoPhillips,
Right.
whatever, complex, since that's sold, I don't know, were you able to match up a sales price against a assessment? And maybe that wasn't disclosed, I just didn't know.
It was reported in the paper at, I believe, 104 million, and I think we were at 99% of the
Really?
on that one.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah. So.
Good work.
Moving into personal property, the municipality assesses two types of personal property: mobile homes and business personal property. Business personal property is tangible property owned by businesses, and it generally consists of inventory, equipment, and supplies. This chart shows the number of accounts associated with both those types of property. The yellow is the number of mobile home accounts, and the blue is the number of business property accounts. It's worth noting that the first $20,000 of business personal property is exempt from taxation, and this count does not include any business that doesn't meet that threshold of taxability. The interesting thing about personal property is that although the number of accounts is fairly similar, the market or the value associated with those two different categories is vastly different. There's $2.9 billion in assessed value associated with business property accounts, and only $80 million associated with mobile homes.
On the blue bar, active businesses, the assumption here is that that number indicates the number of businesses that are no longer active. Is that meaning they're not in business any further?
Are we on this slide?
Correct.
Okay.
So basically, you go back to 2007, we had 5269, 5300. The next year, we're down to 4907.
I think that's more a function of the exemption over that time.
If I may, some of those could have fallen under the $20,000. They're still in business, but they don't meet that threshold of $20,000. Some of them could be that they've closed business and have gone out.
And as we,
Is this also as of January 1st?
no.
January 1st, yes.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
The assessment date is as of January
Yes.
1st.
And I think one thing that's happening, as we see more and more large businesses coming into town, they're taking some of that market share away from the smaller businesses, and you see the small businesses dropping below the threshold and being replaced with a Cabela's or, something of that type. So the count might change because of that factor as well.
Question for you. You see any people shifting personal property out of, I mean, I've heard anecdotally that there's, you know, contractors that don't want to have their equipment taxed inside the municipality, so they go someplace else.
We've had some of that over the years. I'm not aware of it in recent times.
It hasn't recently been happening. A few years ago, one of the big things that everybody remembers is the rail cars moving out to Wasilla and so forth. Since that has happened, we haven't really seen much of that.
Okay, and how does it affect seasonal type operations, like you guys that, you know, have a bajillion motorhomes in the summer and then they all seem to disappear in the winter? Is it just, do you still look at January 1st and therefore it's?
Well, motor vehicles are actually
That's
assessed,
right.
not assessed in personal property, but the lien date is January 1st,
Yeah.
and so if it is a seasonal business, that could affect.
Okay, thank you.
Personal property, although the assessment date is January 1st, the actual tax roll is issued in July and October. July for the timely filers and October for the late and involuntary filers. So the comparison on this slide is from 2012 to 2013. And during that time, the overall change in value was 4.2% in personal property. So, looking forward, we will mail the green cards on January 15th. On that same day, the website will see updated 2014 data, and that marks the start of the appeal period. So you may start to hear from your constituents about that time. The appeal period ends on February 13th, and that's a date worth remembering. We're asking people to contact us early during the appeal period, and we want to encourage you, if you hear from your constituents, to direct them to us, and we'll take care of it. But this slide, the next slide, shows the number of appeals over the last, since 2004, and as you can see, the number of not only appeals but counter contacts and direct contacts have been dropping steadily. I think in the last, say, 3 to 4 years, some of this decline is due to the flat market. Another reason for the decline is the success of our website, which is seeing nearly 1 million hits every year. I think the community is becoming familiar with the website. They're getting comfortable with going there to get some of the information they need. Sometimes a person will only want to know what their neighbor's assessed value is, just to make sure they're being assessed fairly, and they can get that sort of information there. So I think those two factors have caused the decline in appeals and a decline in contacts over the last few years. Given some of the fairly sharp increases we're seeing this year, we expect to get more traffic, more appeals, more inquiries. And I wanted to provide you with our contact information so that if your constituents call, you can either direct them to our website or have them call us. We will gladly call people back. Most issues can be handled without a formal appeal, particularly if they contact us early in the appeal period. When we get into the last week of the appeal period, if someone has a complex issue, it's more difficult to resolve it informally, and they may have to file an appeal. But if you get to us early, we can usually take care of it. Thank you.
Mr. Orman?
So, just so I can make sure, I guess for the benefit of all of us, it's a refresher. The informal process doesn't cost a constituent anything.
That's correct.
But if they file an appeal, what is that fee?
They file a deposit based on the value of the property, and it's a sliding scale. The deposit is given back, so it's not an actual, it doesn't cost them anything, but the requirement is that they participate in the process. In other words, cooperate, help us get to a resolution, and if it goes to the board, they're required to attend the board hearing, and then the deposit is refunded. And does anybody have the sliding fee memorized?
I have it close for properties up to, and correct me where I'm wrong, Janet, up to $100,000, it's $30. $100,000 to $500,000 is a $100 deposit. Above that, $500,000 to, I believe, $700,000.
No.
It ranges between $30 and $1,000 based on the assessed value, the high value
If you
assessed.
can get that to us, that would be helpful, just in case I get a concern.
Certainly.
And I always try to get people for the record, for your, is to engage informally up front. I don't know how many people, I haven't tracked to see how many people have gone to the phone process.
Mr. Starr,
The aspect of your website that lists the, I think it's 4 or 5 comparables in that, can you tell me how that's first updated and then how the criteria of the, maybe it's computer modeled or physically done in there? The one comment that I've heard is that there's a comparative product that maybe is 3 or 4, 5, 10 miles away that's not even in the neighborhood, and yet they don't list the neighbor's house that recently sold. What do I tell a constituent that calls me with that information?
Well, there could be a couple of explanations. We may not know the sale price of the neighbor's house. That may not have been reported to us. It is a computer model. It uses multiple regression analysis, and it looks for the most similar, most comparable property. So it looks in the closest proximity first, I believe, and then if it can't find anything close by, it goes to the next best match, and it uses those comps, it selects comps in that manner.
So the observation of a homeowner that isn't necessarily concerned so much about their value, but they want the accuracy of the record. I have some people that bring that, it's like, hey, why don't they just put my neighbor's house in there? As you say, it may not be recorded, but in the cases that are that, does that help you guys to have that more accurate information, or not really?
It helps a lot. I mean, if we don't know what's happening in the market, we can't measure the market. That's the only way we can do this job, is to get accurate sales information. Otherwise, we're guessing.
No, I didn't quite know how to tell them to engage the conversation, because particularly I wasn't wanting them to suggest that, they had an on-site visit or any of the drama that they didn't particularly ask me to create. If, and I haven't found it to be totally controversial if there is a conversation about specifics in the house. Is that really a bedroom or a den, or, and you guys seem pretty fair, and that's a compliment, so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Steele?
Yeah, a couple of, just to follow up on that particular point. Does the computer model do the adjustments, or is there a person involved?
Well, there's always a person involved, and we spend months calibrating these models. But the computer does the adjustments once the model is calibrated, and it's a complicated multiple regression model.
And the deposit is returned if you participate, or do you have to win the?
If you win, you automatically get it back, but you only have to participate, and if it goes to the board. Many times an appeal does not go to the board. We're able to resolve it without going to the board. But if it does go to the board, then they're required to attend, and that's all.
Yeah, and so if they didn't prevail, they still get their money back that they.
Yeah, I remember the old $100. You pay the $100, and unless you win, thank you very much.
And one thing I'd like to add to that is the discretion of the refund is done by the Board of Equalization unless it's resolved prior to the meeting of the board. So the decision is not the assessors, it's the Board of Equalization.
Ms. Stimbowski?
Okay, I apologize for some tuna here, but this is new to me. So from a resident's perspective, can you explain to me from a homeowner's perspective what the appeal process is? And I just heard you say that they do get the money back if, whether they're successful or not, but now I'm hearing that they may or may not, if there's discretion. So can you just clarify that?
I will. The point I think Kelly was making is that it's not our decision. It's the board's decision. So I have no say in whether they get their money back or not. But the criteria for getting your money back is participate in the process and attend the hearing. If there is a hearing, is there any other criteria?
Access to the property.
Oh, and allow access to the property.
Okay, follow-up question on this, because this came up at one of my community councils. Access to the property. Does the board look negatively on a homeowner who doesn't want to let you in their home, but let you have access to the outside of the property?
They may. If the issue is, if the access is material to the appeal, then they would probably look unfavorably. We would argue that they should look unfavorably on that. In other words, if the property owner says their square footage is wrong and it's 500 square feet less than what we believe it to be, and they don't allow us to go out and measure the property, then generally we would argue that the board should find in the municipality's favor in that case, and the board, I think, generally would do so. But it should, this is a little bit of a gray area, but generally it needs to be material to the appeal too, as well.
Yeah, 'cause until you come to my house, you're not gonna know. Just tell you that right now.
Is it because it's nerdy?
Nope, it's none of it
I'm not
business.
going there, Tim.
Are you done, Ms. Dombrowski?
For now.
Mr. Birch?
Well, as the one who sponsored the ordinance that said that a homeowner that appeals their property appraisal or assessment gets their money back, that was real important to me by virtue of the fact it seems like, citizens shouldn't have to pay for the privilege of appealing to their government for a proper valuation. So I am encouraged that is, still stands. And does that apply for the full spectrum to anybody that, so if you make $1,000, and the objective was, because a complaint at the time, and the reason I sponsored it in that manner, was a complaint at the time is that people would make an appeal of their assessment and then never show up. And so staff and the city would go to great expense to prepare for that appeal in front of the board and everything, and then the homeowner or the property owner is a no-show. So, hopefully that's addressed and that it motivates people to actually be there and participate in the process.
I think it strikes a nice fair balance in encouraging or discouraging frivolous appeals, but also keeping the process open to the property owner.
And that applies for whether it's $100 or $1,000.
Right.
And the percentage that we get back, it's a huge number. It's like 97, 98%.
Those ones that show up, right?
Yeah, they show
Well,
up.
are they withdrawn?
Or they're resolved prior to the hearing. So-
If I may,
Thank you.
in 2013, we had 416 appeals filed. We had 85 of those 416 actually go to a hearing. And out of those 85, there may have been one or two where the appeal deposit was not returned. And that was due to the fact there was denied access, which was crucial to the decision of the appeal.
Well, good work, great brief, and keep up the good work. That's an excellent report.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For the record reflect, we were joined by Mayor Dan during Mrs. Dombrowski's original round. Mr. Steele and then Ms. Dombrowski.
I'm fine, thank you.
You're fine, Ms. Dombrowski?
Just to follow up, those two are so properties that were denied because of access. Was it just access to the physical property or was it to the intern? Was it to the actual?
Right off the top of my head, Ms. Dombrowski, I don't know. I would have to go back and research to determine whether it was just the outside or the inside. I just know that my clerks are the ones that do the refunds, and I do know that there was a couple of them that were denied.
If you could follow it up in an email. I don't need to know what the properties were. I'm just curious because
Okay.
this is something, like I said, has come up at a community council in my
Sure,
area.
no problem.
And it kind of depends on whether if we can measure on the outside and they're okay with that, that's fine, as long as the issues that they're bringing up are just about square footage and things like that. If they're talking about interior issues, if we can't see what they're talking about, that would be a problem for interior inspection. Does that help?
Yeah, I see where you're going. I'm not making a judgment either way. I'm just trying to learn about the topic.
My apologies, Mr. Trini. I confused you with Mr. Steele.
That's
Mr.
hard to
Trini?
do.
Well, that's a whole other story. Mr. Van Zandt, is there anything from the state's perspective, because in years past, there's property we're not taxing, that you think we should be? Is that situation still existing out there?
That issue has been resolved. We're still watching, especially the makeup of the assessment department, because they've had cuts over the years, not since Brian's been here, but since while Marty was here. It makes it hard to get the job done. As long as they can get their job done with the numbers that they're espousing now, we're not concerned. One thing that may come to the forefront is we're looking into your personal property assessments because you're not getting them done the way you're supposed to get them done. You're supposed to have them done the same time your real roll's done, but due to the workload, we understand. But we're looking into that. We really haven't even talked to the assessor's office about that yet. But that may be a change that's coming in the wind in the next few years.
When the assessor's office deals with the state on that personal property, could you let the assembly know, just send us a memo, let us know what's happening, what the issue is, and how it's going to be resolved? We'd appreciate it, rather than hearing about it next year. You guys did a great job here. To today, I just want to know, because in years past, the state's had some issues with how we assess property.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Harmon?
Well, one thing to answer, I guess, I actually use the informal process through appeal on my rental property, and one of was they had some data wrong that happened to be inside. Like, for instance, they had it with no heat source in the house. And I didn't know any other way other than taking a picture and walking out and saying, see, so I let them in. And I didn't have a problem with that because it was basically, I wanted to correct what was there functionally. And then there was something else that they had off that was wrong, and I kept trying to explain. I think they had it as 3 bedrooms, there were only 2 at the time, so I let them in. So I think those things are pretty irrelevant and need to, access should be working properly. And then secondly, and I'm sorry I missed the very first part of it, but I looked through the list. I'm going to go back to the first couple pages here. But a question I had was religious exemption. I'm seeing 2.1 million. Is that residential religious, or is that all inclusive?
That's all religious exemptions.
So you're talking Holy Family Cathedral, all the huge churches.
Yes.
Only 2.1 million.
It's not a big number. And that's taxable, that's tax associated with the value.
Not the assessment.
It's not the assessed value.
It's
It's the
tax.
estimated tax that would be associated with those properties.
I find that to be a fairly low number, but okay.
Mr. Starr?
You didn't mention anything about payment in lieu of taxes, such as the military properties and some of that other stuff. Does your office get into those debates as well?
I have not, well, I have not recently been involved in the pilots, so I really don't have a lot to comment on that, to be honest with you. I've only been in this position 3 months. When I first started, that was a hot topic. I was directly involved in the base housing, but I haven't touched that issue in several years, to be honest.
In that case, maybe the state, who does that then, if you don't know the answer? Ms. Mahoney's not here, but do we get out there and, I mean, that's a huge explosive growth area as well.
Do we have any answer, or do we need to?
What I'd like to say is, yes, Mr. Starr, we have been involved in the payment of lieu of taxes process. And yes, you're absolutely right, it is a large area. And Bryant is correct that he has not directly been involved with them immediately. Our office is responsible for identifying the property and understanding what would be applicable within the arrangement for the payment of lieu of taxes.
This is great, Jack. Mr. Starr, are you done?
No, I don't know how to validate whether we're keeping up on that or not. Do you have any?
Can I look into that issue?
Sure.
And give you a reason to reply to
Coordinate
the
your
email?
answer with Ms. Mahoney when you get a chance.
Okay.
That would be helpful. That's all.
Mr. Grayjack?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much for the presentation again. I really appreciate it. Can you send us a copy via email of the presentation? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Anyone else? Mr. Horniman?
I want to just clarify what I'm getting here on this page 6, which is the mandatory exemptions. And I'm looking at federal, I'm looking at religious. I'm having a hard time grasping the number. Are you saying that there's only $253,000 in taxes that we could be collecting on from the federal government, and we're just not because it's exempt?
That's within the, obviously that doesn't include the large national forest areas. Is that?
State would actually, the Chugach National Forest is a state.
I'm not focused on that so much as I am like
I'm sorry, I want to make sure.
federal properties like, federal building, and there's other lease properties that they have that they.
There is-
This is an estimated tax number, and to be honest, on some of these exempt parcels, like the federal, where you know they're exempt, the inventory on those parcels is not exactly correct always.
Is it the same statement then can be made about religious? Because $2.1 million is not a lot of money when the properties that I'm seeing.
It's possible. The records on the exempt parcels are not as meticulously updated as they are on the taxable parcels. So that's why we labeled this as estimated tax amounts, and it's just based on the numbers that are in the database and on a estimated mill rate for the year. So.
My suspicion is, as you've seen the senior citizen and DV spike, so too, I think, are the other numbers, and no one's capturing that data. I realize it's a difficult number to kind of get at, but I think that's a source of concern.
Mr. Benzak?
If I might, Mr. Honan, one thing all of us recommend to all municipalities is don't spend your time out there on these exempt properties like the federal properties, the church properties, state properties. You don't gain revenue from it, and you don't have the personnel and the resources to go out there and do that every year. So we advocate that they don't do that every year and keep up with it. So I think that's why Brian said this was an estimate. I don't know what they based it on, but those records typically are not maintained by the assessor's office. They'll have a picture. Sometimes somebody will go out and have a drawing of it, but typically they're not updated. So getting a number on is very difficult.
We have, over the last several years, for a number of reasons, made an effort to make those records more accurate, but there's still a number of them that haven't been updated. And it always has to be a low priority compared to.
Well, I get that, and particularly with resources as strained as they have been. My concern is that at some point, just as we see on the scale where the state reimbursement ended in 1996, there may be a day, Mr. Manzant, that legislature comes back for whatever reason, lobbied or legislated or improved or whatever, and we need to have an accurate, fairly well good number. So
At that time, they'll have to go out, but
I understand.
yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Training.
Steve, on Cabota property. Cabota's been buying property in Government Hill. Once the state buys that property, it goes off our tax rolls. Is there any way we can still tax that property? Because if they've got commercial enterprise on it, I could see if we put a bridge implant on it, then it goes off the tax roll, but if it's not used for the bridge, it was just a buy for future use, should we be able to tax that property still?
Well, if it's in the name of the state, no, you can't tax it like you can the houses that you live in. However, if it's being used, if it's bought on the bet that, hey, down the line, we're gonna be using that, but whoever's in that property has a lease for them to use it until such and such, then Brian's office could go in there and get them with what we call a possessory interest, which is like you do at the airport and the railroad, and tax the individuals that are using it at that time. The hard part about that is what length of term do you use? How long are you gonna set?
Would we need to change the state law to allow us to tax? I'm just concerned because I see more property being picked up at Cabota for bridge that may not ever exist. I don't want the property going off the tax rolls.
Could you change the state law with that? Yes, you can. It would take some forethought before we get that introduced. I'm not sure you get introduced this year, but we could. You could.
Brian, are we looking at the properties that winks off the tax rolls that Cabota's been picking up?
Yes, we've looked at that. If they're vacant properties, then they do go off the tax roll. If it's leased to a private entity, then it should be taxed as a possessory interest. But once again, if the length of term of a lease term is very short, then the taxable value is pretty minimal.
Would you just, when you have a chance, just let the assembly know what property on Government Hill that has been picked up by Cabota and its tax status? Because that bridge may not ever happen. I just don't want to see property go off the tax rolls.
We can do that.
Thank you.
Mr. Birch.
You had mentioned the possessory interest, and from my tour at the airport as the director of engineering for about 8 years, I frequently fielded calls and concerns from folks that were at the airport that were paying city taxes based on, say, a hangar that they had at the airport on airport lease land. And their concern was that they're paying for police and fire, whatever our municipal taxes go for. At the same time, it's on airport lease land, and they say they're getting charged double because they're paying for airport police and fire and so forth, but they're also paying for their possessory interest on police and fire for the city. How do you deal with that, or is that still the case?
It is still the case, and we hear that argument on occasion. The tax districts, I believe, and I may need help here, are set in the charter. It's not a simple thing to adjust tax districts, and we are bound by the code to assess based on the tax district they reside in.
But what do you say to a constituent that says, hey, I'm paying twice? I mean, I'm sitting out here at the airport, I'm paying for...
Well, we're saying that people coming in and out of the airport are using city services. It's not just whether that particular location receives a city service, it's the traffic that location involves. Those people, much like people coming on and off the base, they use city services. They get the fire, police, and ambulance availability, and so it's not as simple as, oh, I'm out here, I shouldn't have to pay any taxes.
Well, I guess I would take umbrage with that.
Okay.
That's because we're taxing property, you know, that hangar that sits out at the airport, it didn't take a trip downtown to use city services. You know, that's a person, and if we're taxing property, then you tax the property where it sits. And if you're taxing people, then you can throw up a toll booth and tax the people. But anyway, I was just curious, and I know there's a significant valuation on that possessory interest at the Anchorage Airport as an example, and it may be the case in the other municipal or other state-owned airports in the municipality. But I've always struggled with how you reconcile that when you have people that are, you know, basically being taxed twice for a similar service.
And you tax the value of the leases too.
Yeah, well, it's the same, that's the tax we're talking
There
about.
are two entries. One's a taxable on the value of the lease, and you tax the real property.
Well, it's both a real property tax, it's the value of the lease, we do both the improvement and the land in the same way. We tax it based on a possessory interest
Which we'll
calculation.
talk, because I don't understand how with the decreasing lease term, you know, it's now 23 years when it used to be 50, why the value goes up, but it's voodoo science to me when you're figuring out that. And believe me, I got a lot of property out there like that, so.
I worked with you years ago on one of your properties out there.
Still, Mr. Birch is correct, it's a fight that we just stopped fighting, quite frankly, it's hard to keep up with it. But
Anyone else?
isn't good fight.
Any more questions? Meeting's adjourned.